Welcome back. Looking at helping a player that had limited thoracic rotation. Obviously understanding how you move and how the swing fits to you. That's one thing that I really, each student that I'm teaching, I'm looking at what's the easiest way for them to be successful, what's their gifts, what's their limitations, and how can we fit the swing sort of to match what the player can currently do, and then ultimately with the right sort of cueing and the right work, potentially even away from the golf course, how do we get it so they can get to their sort of optimum playing ability. So for this player, when we looked at the thoracic rotation, when we were doing our thoracic rotation test, they were pretty limited when it came to how they were getting rotation through their upper body, okay? So that obviously leads to, okay, well, where are we going to get rotation from when we're looking at the golf swing, and then what's the easiest for the player? This player was pretty gifted in the lower body, so two things we did. We flared the toes a little bit to open up the amount of range that they had so they could turn their hip a little bit more, because we knew we weren't going to get the rotation as much through the upper body, okay? So there's a lot more that goes into that, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview there, and then what the fix was for this player, okay? So they were ultimately trying to get a bigger turn in the backswing because they noticed on video that they were sort of short in their turn, okay? So what would happen is they would get here, they'd sort of run out of range with the thoracic, so they would turn about, say, this much. Lots of ways to get range in the backswing, this is just one. And then as they would go up, the arms would start to collapse, they would get sort of close to their body, and because they weren't turned, they'd generate energy by driving their legs, which would put the club a little bit too much from the inside, and then they struggle a little bit with low point and overdraws, okay? So that was this player's tendencies. This might not be you. This is just what this player was doing. I'm just walking you through exactly the steps that we took once I knew more about how the player moved to help them be more successful. So what we did, flared the toes a little bit. That allowed the trail hip to rotate more because we weren't going to get the rotation through the chest. And then when they got to about here, they sensed that this wasn't stretched as much because they were using their hip, started to feel the muscle more in their hip. Arms were a little bit more relaxed but away from them. And then when they came down, because there was more width and more load, when they started to push out of this hip, it helped the club start to come around their body. Obviously, when this part of the swing is over, trying to stretch but it can't, and then the hands get narrow and I'm not that turned, if I drive out of that lower hip, or my trail hip, you can see what that would do to my upper body, right? So that's going to sort of tilt me back, and then as that player started to tilt back, the low point would be an issue, and then the amount of in to out overdraw and pushes would be a big pattern that I would see with that, right? So once we got the load in the hip, that changed how the player felt when they transitioned. The load and the width allowed them to start to unwind with rotation, right? Because I'm pushed, that's going to help me turn. If I'm not loaded there and I'm overstretched and narrow, that's sort of the way that I'm going to fire, okay? So if I load this way and then a little bit more width, that player started to feel like, oh, they could push out of the hip. Now the hip is rotating, I would say, versus like driving or swaying a little bit too far forward. They were driving out of that hip. They started to sense that that lead part of their body could stay down versus firing up like this. Those two combinations, so once I got the load, a little softer, a little wider, and then the lead side staying down, they started to sense that through the ball, the club was starting to swing a little bit more around their body, right? Versus this one, obviously that's going to throw the club quite a bit out to the right, or too much from the inside, right? So they felt like the club was really coming from the inside and having to rotate hard. And then once they got the load, upper body, lead side able to stay down a bit more, club starts to swing around them, changes the path, changes the attack. Again, makes life a little bit easier when you're playing golf. But once we knew how the player moved, could put the right pieces in place, make it a lot easier for them to hit straight shots. If you want to know what is right for you and the best way for you to move and swing, make sure you check the description below. Me and my team have been working on this great program that can help players get better a lot faster. Thanks so much for watching. Have a great day.